Make a note here that what you're talking about, which I think is really profound, is that the battle space of our world right now is cognitive.
Yeah, it's happening here. It's happening in the hippocampus.
In the hippocampus. That's where the warfare is taking place.
Is essentially the target of the war. This is where the war takes place.
Because, and this is why I would guess that we see, like in the wars that we're having right now, we're seeing around the world, the governments are no matter which side, are pushing out just propaganda and lies constantly. There's no real information, but it's all being pushed through controlled narratives and through media that's designed to say to you, don't think for yourself.
Yeah.
Don't question anything. You're not an authoritative source. Here are the authoritative sources. You should trust them and believe them no matter what, which means don't think for yourself.
Yeah. It's even worse. I'll come to that in a second. Okay. It's really even worse than that.
Okay.
And why this is happening, why they need to check that only a certain amount of information, a certain level of information is actually coming through.
Wow.
It's about installing essentially a new operating system in our brains. And this operating system shouldn't be interfered by either previous knowledge or by alternative views.
Okay.
So if you want to install if you want to modify the brain and you want to have people with a certain modified brain, then you need to control what goes into this brain.
Yes.
All the time we were fear-mongered. We were killing our parents, kids were killing their grandparents if they don't obey the rules, rules, and it was always devastating what would happen if we don't follow the rules. And so we had what we experienced is what we call pre-traumatic stress. There was actually a paper published by the Gates Foundation, a research paper, showing that if you do fear-mongering, you produce the same effects like if you had experienced the traumatic event in real life. Wow. When you experience a traumatic event, you develop what we call a post-traumatic stress syndrome. Mm-hmm. And the hallmark of a post-traumatic stress syndrome, besides strong depression, is the shrinkage of the hippocampus. It's a hallmark. You have a very, very small hippocampus when you suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome. And what the paper showed by the Gates Foundation, if you do fear-mongering, the same thing will happen. They called it pre-traumatic stress syndrome. Fear, I mean, you remember the slide I showed you with all the areas.
Yeah, the isolation and everything.
The isolation took part,
right,
which dropped production of neurogenesis. We didn't get enough physical exercise. The food changed dramatically.
Yes.
People didn't eat well anymore. Then the purpose of life of many people disintegrated, you know. Of
social
course.
Interaction. You could only hug your family members through a piece of plastic. Remember that?
Yeah.
People did that.
It's so weird. Now and then, of course, the purpose in life. I mean, many people had to shut down their businesses.
Yeah.
And there was no clear indication that there's hope that they can start again in any time soon.
Right.
So all these things together, sleep essentially quality dropped dramatically when every evening you hear in the prime news what's going on in the world, you know, how bad it is, even though it was never that bad as it was, told.
Shocking to me how many layers of warfare there are against us right now. Mm-hmm. I mean, you presented this whole new kind of warfare that's happening in the cognitive space, and it's a type of war that's not even recognized by most people.
No, it's not. And we see only these different wars. We see the war against a pandemic, and then we see a war against climate change. Then we see a war over borders, which might be global wars eventually. At least the threat is in the air. And so we see all these different wars. But for me, all these wars are actually essentially only one war, a war against the brain.
Wow.
Because all the fears and all the narratives point in one direction. To solve each of these problems, you need a global government, because not a single government in the world can solve the problem.
That's the narrative.
That's the narrative. Yeah. And that's implanted in our brain. Censorship is a big thing, and the European Union just stated that the hugest pandemic we have is misinformation. What they actually mean is what we are talking here about. This is misinformation.
They claim that, yeah.
Yeah, they claim that.
Right.
And their biggest fear is that our information interferes with their idea to reprogram humans.
Right. Exactly.
So,
perfectly stated.
So anyway, we have this loss of individuality, and what this leads to is a culture damaging life change. We accept the global technocratic dictatorship in such a situation, and the installation, what I call an AI-controlled social operating system.
And we all know people who worship that at the same time.
Yeah.
They will worship their jailers.
It's their way out.
Obedience to the system that's destroying them.
Yeah, but it's their way out, and we have to make sure that they understand what's going on, and I think we have still time, but the time is running out. We have to be quick.